Maybe a word on the Netherlands, not my country, but my country of adoption. Bellingcat is now based, is a foundation that is based in the Netherlands, which doesn't mean that all the staff lives in the Netherlands, but it's tied in some ways to the Netherlands, also through the investigations that it has conducted, of course. Beyond Bellingcat, the Netherlands has actually a longer history of being a leader in open source intelligence through its intelligence community and through its civil society, I would say. So that's part of a bigger trend, I would say, in the Netherlands. And so perhaps that's quite meaningful to have Eliot Higgins here today as a result. Of course, OSINT goes, open source intelligence, OSINT goes much beyond the Netherlands. It's become a global trend, I think sometimes even more hype than a trend. And that owes in big part to the work of Eliot Higgins and his vision, which began, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the early days of the Syrian civil war on your own, and later expanded because you had a vision about creating a community around you, and in my view, so that's why Bellingcat is here and other groups, OSINT groups have disappeared because they've not managed to structure a community around them to the same extent. In recognition of your pioneering work and your commitment also to rigorous digital investigations with massive political impact, you will receive an honorary doctorate from Leiden University tomorrow as a part of the university's 450th anniversary, which we call Dies Natalis. And that is the main reason why you're visiting the Netherlands. But you took some time from your demanding schedule to be with us here this evening and to give a talk that you entitled Information Disorder. The plan is for Eliot to speak for 30 minutes, maybe a bit more, and then there will be another 20, 30 minutes of Q&A for you to ask questions. So please do listen to him carefully, think about good questions to ask, and there'll be some time to ask him these questions. Without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Eliot Higgins.
So I'd like to start with a question to all of you. How many of you have a friend, a relative, or colleague who believes in a conspiracy theory? Raise your hand. Yeah, an awful lot of people. And that's something that I find fascinating. I always get this same result every time I ask that question. You all know someone who believes something that seems to be completely mad. But why is that? Over the years, I've encountered all kinds of different conspiracy theories. Some of them have been about myself, working for the CIA or some other intelligence agency. Some of it has been about the topics we've worked on, chemical weapons in Syria, MH17. But I realized with all of these that it's always a pattern behind it. And I really wanted to drill down into why that was. So today I'm going to talk to you about this thing called information disorder. So what is information disorder? Well, it's basically breaking down what we usually talk about when we say disinformation or misinformation into actually what that is. Misinformation being false or misleading information that is shared without the intention to cause harm. It's people who are sharing stuff because they actually believe it's true or they haven't cared enough to check. Then there's disinformation. That's information that's shared with the intent to cause harm. That's the kind of propaganda and disinformation we hear about all the time. And then there's malinformation. That's reality-based information that's used specifically to cause harm. And this is based off work done by Claire Wardle, who developed a lot of the ideas around information disorder and how it's categorized. But I want to dive deeper into that. So we know what information disorder is, but who are the people who spread it and why? Now, we have, in my opinion, 4 main agents of information disorder. One of them is official state, political, and government actors. So these are the people who are obviously, working for the government. It could be officials, members of parliament, members of a political party. It can be a tweet. It can be an official report. But it's false information that is being produced by those sources. And then you have their proxies. And these are the more overt types, for example, Russia Today, Press TV, state media. It can be more covert, so for example, the Internet Research Agency, other disinformation campaigns. It can also be captured media, for example. And then we have a third category, the self-interested actors. And these are individuals who have their own agendas, and they aren't necessarily political. I'll dig into exactly what those are in a lot more detail later. But core to all of this are true believers. It's the people who really, really believe this stuff. And the problem with the approach to countering disinformation from 2016 has been it's really been about these outside actors acting on the true believers. So I'm just going to grab my water. And the thing is, this isn't absolutely correct. In fact, really, this is a system. This isn't just outside actors, Russia telling people lies and people falling for it. It's a much more complicated system. And the question is, who are the true believers? Because they are absolutely core to this system. Without the true believers, it's just a bunch of liars lying to each other. So let's take a look at who they can be. We have people who believe the Earth is flat, or that vaccines are evil, or that ivermectin can be used to cure every disease in the world. It can be a whole range of different topics. It can be anything under the sun. It can be really obscure stuff that you wouldn't even hear or care about. But the question is, why do people become true believers then? And I think there's a couple of processes that are in play here. So let's give an example. You're, at home, you're stuck at home, you can't go outside because there's a global pandemic, and you're worried about the vaccines. So you go onto Google and you Google, are vaccines safe? And what that brings you to are answers that might say that having all the vaccines at once might be a problem. And that's not so extreme. I mean, there's people who have claimed that for a long time in regards, for example, in the US, about having multiple vaccines at the same time, and there's writing about that, there's discussions, but you search for that, you start clicking away, and the algorithm notices and say, hey, you want more content on this? Have more content on it. And you also find communities who are sharing content around these topics. So they engage. The algorithm engages and starts serving you more content. And a subset of that content is going to be slightly more extreme. Now, vaccines can make you sick. Now, you may think, well, that's not true. I've read all these medical professionals. They know what they're talking about. So off you go, happy with the answers that you've got. But some of you might think, oh, actually, that's interesting. Going to click some more and read more about this. And again, you have a community that tells you more information about it because they've already done this search. They've made the connections. And you also have the algorithm as well. And that recommends you information that says vaccines are designed to make you sick. And the process repeats again. And now Bill Gates wants to put microchips in those vaccines. It's not everyone's going to keep going up here, but there's always a subset of people who'll be drawn upwards. And finally, 5G activates the microchips. Now, this may sound insane. Who would believe that? Well, in the UK, it was enough people to burn down 77 cell phone towers. So this has a real-world impact. I've just got over the flu, unfortunately, so my throat's a bit knackered. But why do people get to the top of that pyramid? I mean, most people in this room, I hope, wouldn't get to the top of that pyramid. Well, there's something else happening as well. This isn't because they're idiots, they're fools. It's because they have a sense of distrust in a source of authority that is telling them information. Now, in a traditional media model that we kind of exist in, we build our understanding of the world from sources of authority that are giving us information. This was described by Walter Lippmann in his book, Public Opinion. The idea is that you have gatekeepers of information, the media, the government, and they publish information that informs public opinion. And through that, public opinion can be shaped. The problem is we don't live in a society where we just have newspapers or TV news. We have all the information we want all the time from any source that we can find. And this starts causing problems when you have deep distrust. And I was sent this survey of people who really got into QAnon. And there were three main elements to this that drew them deeply into QAnon. First was a distrust of the establishment. And that could be found in a whole range of different things. It didn't have to be one thing or a specific set of things. It could be all kinds of different things. You then have that codified by crisis. It can be a political, personal, social crisis. It can be you're locked inside for half a year, not being able to go outside because of a global pandemic. It could be because your wife has left you and taking all the kids, which seems to be a growing group of people on the internet. But then you do your own research, and that's where it starts being nurtured. And if you have those three elements together, it will develop someone who has a very open mind in terms of conspiracy theories. And these are just a few examples of people who fell down that rabbit hole. And this shows that distrust is absolutely core to the reasoning why people get drawn into conspiracy theories. It's not because Russia has told them that the government is lying to them. It's because through their own personal experience, they've developed a distrust in a source of authority. If you look at COVID disinformation, a lot of it came from the alternative health community, which is made up of people, women in particular, who've had bad medical experiences. They find communities where there's more people who've had the same experience, and that often reinforces that, and usually those experiences have been quite unpleasant to like a significant degree, which codifies that for them. And then they find the communities where that's nurtured, that's grown, and they can hold more and more extreme beliefs. So once we understand that, we can start understanding when we end up with people like this appearing in the world. It's not random, it's not some crazy things, it's not because they're stupid, although I can make exceptions in some cases. It's because they've gone through this process of distrust, the codification of that, and finding communities online that reinforce that. And what do these communities look like? This is work by a professor called Kate Starbird. She analysed link sharing among online communities. And what this represents are articles that were shared in part or completely across multiple websites. This pink group on the bottom corner, that is a wire service article that was published on multiple mainstream websites. But this big blue blob on the top right-hand corner is an alternative media ecosystem. And this was all about the White Helmets, the Syrian civil defense group that was targeted by disinformation. So what we're actually seeing here is each of these circles represents the number of articles shared on that domain, and the thickness of each line is how many times that was shared across different domains. And what you're seeing here is lots of websites with the same viewpoint sharing each other's articles and creating an echo chamber of information. Now, if you're within that echo chamber consuming that information, you're seeing lots of different websites publishing the same thing, but they're copying from each other. And it's not it's the same thing because it is the same thing. It's not because they've come to the same conclusions individually, but it gives the illusion of having multiple sources of information about the topic. And this covers websites that are like Russia Today and Sputnik News, which are state media, so they're proxy state actors. You have 21st Century Wire, Mid-Press News, Global Research, which are independent media, but with this kind of conspiratorial bent. But they always present themselves as independent and alternative media, offering a perspective that's contrary to mainstream news and views. So these are the people who've gone through that process of developing and distrusting the source of authority, which is mainstream media, and they have created their own environment to exist in where that is fueled and grown and nurtured. So it becomes very clear then that in this system, without the truth believers, what you end up having is just a bunch of liars lying to each other. So the goal is to stop there being so many true believers. Before we move on to that, I want to talk a bit more about self-interested actors, because this is a huge range of different types of people. This isn't just the people you might think are obvious. And I'll give you an example, and this may reveal a bit about my YouTube history. So, HoofGP. Who knows about the HoofGP? Yeah, a few of you do. It's your guilty secret. So he's a guy who he's in Scotland. His job is going around fixing the hooves of injured cows. So he gets them in this grip and starts scraping them off, and it's like an AMSR video, very relaxing for some people. And he gets millions and millions of views on these videos, and it's a decent income for him. So I watch these videos, and that means I get algorithmic recommendations of other similar videos. And I started noticing some really weird videos popping up, and this is one of them. This is from the Hoof Doctor. And this is called cut, trim, cleaning, medical support for necrotic wounds on a cow's hoof. So you've got a cow's hoof here, and I've blanked out a bunch of gross-looking maggots. And a lot of the videos are like that, and they're popping up in my recommendations, and they were getting about 10% of the views as the Hoof GP videos. And I realized that this hoof in this video is not attached to a cow. It's a cow's leg that's been cut off. They've then put it into a fake trap, like in Hoof GP, dressed it up with nails and pus and maggots and all sorts of gross stuff, which they then clean up. This is, you've heard of fake news, this is fake hooves. I've been waiting so long for that. So, but this is really interesting because this reflects something that you see more and more on the internet. Grifters, basically, looking for what's popular and trying to hijack the algorithm by doing fakes. And I went back on the history of the hoof doctor, and I found that previously they'd been doing no hoof doctoring at all. All their videos were cleaning up messy sidewalks, which itself was a genre of videos that became very popular when there was a guy going around doing this in the US. And this is a couple of guys in Vietnam who are doing this basically just to harvest the algorithm to get content. So when I talk about self-interested actors, it can be people like this. People are just trying to make a bit of money. And the average wage in Vietnam is $400 a month. And that video I just showed you the still from has about 2 million views, which would generate about $1,000 to $2,000 of income. Which, if you think in terms of these people, that's a month's work for one video on the internet of a dead cow's hoof covered in maggots. So for them, it's good business. But for us, it creates what we call the enshittification of the internet, where you have more and more content that is just a copy of other content. You've probably seen things like carpet cleaning videos, for example, which have been turned into something, or rust cleaning videos, where people are faking rust on stuff to clean it off. It just turns everything into a bunch of images of something else that are being used to engage people in the algorithm. So this is kind of one end of the self-interested actors. They aren't doing this because they're trying to trick you with propaganda. They're just trying to make some money off something that's popular and gaming the algorithm to do it. But then you have people like this. This is a guy called Jackson Hinkle. He calls himself a MAGA communist. I'm not going to swear because this is a live stream, and I already have anyway, but he is someone who started off as a teenager being an environmentalist at college. He then became a Bernie Sanders supporter, eventually becoming a Trump supporter, and what he calls a MAGA communist. I, in my heart of hearts, do not believe he actually believes the stuff he's saying. He is just a grifter who uses the politics of other people to get engagement. So, for example, with the Israeli invasion of Gaza, he was posting a lot of content about Gaza that included videos and photographs from Syria, AI-generated imagery, just to get the engagement. But several months ago, he was invited to the Donbass, and you just don't turn up there. So I suspect this was something that was organized by the Russian government so they could use him for their own purposes for PR. And in fact, he ended up also being invited to the United Nations to speak about his experiences a couple of weeks later. And this is the video he posted.
We're here at the United Nations about to give a brief presentation, do some Q&A with the mainstream media about a recent trip to the Donbass. My first time here. It's going to be pretty cool, so be sure to tune in. I'm going to be sharing all the links and everything, but I'm sure the mainstream media is not going to like what we have to say.
So you see, he positions himself against the mainstream media. It's the typical thing where he's trying to exploit people's, the true believers' distrust. So now he gives his press conference, and look at how the languages he uses to describe his experiences.
I want to share my experiences from my recent trip to the newly liberated territories of the Russian Federation in the Donbass. My journey took me to Mariupol, Tokmak, Berdyansk, Melitopol, and the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant over my 7-day trip, providing me with firsthand insights that starkly contradicts the lies and the narratives that have been propagated by the mainstream media and the Western political elite here.
So there's a theme emerging. Now, Russia Today covered this, and look how they describe it.
As Western powers ship seemingly countless billions of weapons to Kyiv, its media has failed to fairly cover the Ukrainian conflict, including the dangers brought on by America's involvement. Now, that's according to a group of legal and political experts who addressed the UN after a trip to observe the conflict zone.
Most shockingly was my visit to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Several points of critical infrastructure at the plant have recently been compromised by Ukrainian drone attacks and shelling.
So you see there, we have a state actor who then goes to a self-interested actor, someone who wants to get some clicks, some engagement, and then they host him at the United Nations so they can get the lovely footage that they can have with their political expert on Russian state media. So this is all basically all those people feeding off each other. They're all getting something out of this, but ultimately they're trying to influence the true believers, and that's why they keep on using the language attacking the mainstream media and the mainstream news. So this is an example of how you can actually put this into practice. So the question is, what do we do about this? Now, in 2014, I founded Bellingcat. One of our first big stories was on MH17. In fact, if you've got Nat Geo, the documentary we've made about this is out tonight, if you want to watch that. And we spent a long time building a community around open source investigation and the conflicts in Ukraine. In 2022, Russia officially invaded Ukraine. And this provides some examples of how you can actually build resilience against this kind of thing. So, this video was posted online by the Donetsk People's Republic just before the invasion. And it came along with a pre-installed narrative. But as you can see, this is mainly gunfire and grass, and not really much. Plus an explosion. Now, take note of the explosion, because this is the post that it was shared with. It describes these saboteurs who were speaking Polish, who were captured and killed. They had web cameras taken off them that had this footage on them, and they claimed they were attacking chlorine storage plants in Ukrainian territory that was controlled by Russian separatist forces. Now, note the date of this, February 18th. The people who posted this online made a terrible error. On most social media platforms, when you post a video or photograph, it strips all the metadata. This was posted on Telegram, which does not do that. So we ended up with a lot of metadata. Now, this is something that was picked up on by a Twitter user who was just engaged with the conflict and knew about metadata and thought to check. And then they shared that, and a community, almost a sub-community really, emerged around this specific video of people just digging through this metadata. So first of all, the creation date is 10 days before the post was made, not the night before as the post was claiming it took place. Bit odd. The project path is also showing us this is the folder it was saved in, also 10 days before the incident took place. It was showed it was edited in Adobe Premiere Pro, and most importantly is this one, pantry ingredient file path. Now, this is one of the files that was used as part of the video. This is the whole metadata is like a blueprint of how to do this. And if you search that name and put it into YouTube, you find this video from 2010, which is a Finnish arms test where they're firing rockets. And you listen, you'll hear something interesting. Those explosions are the same explosions from the video. There was sound engineers who were just on the Twitter thread, took the audio from both, and they put them together, and they realized that actually these are exactly the same waveforms. And in fact, there is enough detail in the metadata. It actually tells you the precise timestamp from this video and where it was copied into the other video. So this community very, very rapidly debunked this. It took them less than an hour to find all this information and completely debunk it. Now, what normally happens is you have these state actors, these political actors, kind of injecting the disinformation into these three other agents and hope they pick up on it. But because it was debunked so quickly, that didn't happen. Because even the true believers won't believe something if it's been debunked before they see it. It's kind of like once they see it, they'll believe it, and they'll refuse any debunking. They'll say, well, that's just Western propaganda. But they aren't going to see something that's been thoroughly debunked and say, I'm going to believe that thing. So as a preventative measure, having online communities who are engaged with a topic and could quickly fact-check and respond is useful. If this had been fact-checked and 24 hours there was an article published, it wouldn't have made much of a difference, because by that point, it would already have entered those communities and already been used for propaganda purposes. But because it was done so quickly, it stopped that from happening. And that's something that I think is really, really crucial when we're dealing with disinformation and misinformation. Something else that this community started doing is finding these videos on TikTok just before the invasion of Russian troop movements. And this was at a time when there was still debate about whether or not Russia would invade. Zelensky was trying to calm people down, saying it wouldn't happen. But it was possible to geolocate all of these videos. And by geolocating and mapping them, it was possible to create a map of where all these positions were and actually show almost in real time how these troops are moving closer and closer to the border with Ukraine. They're moving out of camps that had already been identified. And this is actually an online map you can go to at the Center of Information Resilience that has all these different videos tagged, so you can actually see the war unfolding through social media, through this archive. And from our experience in the past, we know archiving is really important. And we had lots of different communities who are already emerging online doing geolocations. But if it's on Twitter, it's not going to be much use for people in the long term. Plus, these individuals don't have their own reputations like Bellingcat does. So we started a process where we had this community online doing this work, and we pulled it into a process using this platform called Atlas, where we had trained volunteers who would then verify those geolocations. And that was then entered into a publicly available map of verified videos that could be accessible to anyone. This is at ukraine.bellingcat.com. The dataset is downloadable, so anyone can take it out of the system and start using it for their own purposes. This is used by a huge number of organizations, including demining organizations, aid organizations. And it also is an archive of the conflict and how the conflict unfolded. And again, this comes from a community. This comes from the online spaces where you are able to kind of direct these energies and put them into a process to produce useful data at the end of that. And that's important for us because we've been doing a lot of work on legal accountability using open source evidence. We've been doing mock hearings, mock trials, examining how that process that I've just demonstrated to you could actually create evidence for courts. We've developed an investigation process designed around legal accountability. So it's not just about fact-checking and debunking stuff. It's like, say, what can we do more with that? But those foundational elements of it, those individual videos that have been verified and geolocated, was done by an online community of people on Twitter. And if you can harness that energy, you can harness that chaos and pull it into a process, you can start producing something that's useful, that can be actionable, that can actually affect real change. We've produced reports on this. We're continuing to produce reports and doing academic work on it. In Ukraine, we've worked in the International Criminal Court to produce evidence that will be used in prosecutions. So this works, this happens, but it can, if you engage a community with it, they can get a hell of a lot of work done. So I want to talk to you a bit about how Bellingcat has structured itself over the years. Bellingcat is a weird organization, the way it's structured. It's not Bellingcat and that's it. We kind of see ourselves at the center of an onion. And I'll give you a moment to absorb this diagram. So at the center, in that green dot at the center, that is what we would consider the core of Bellingcat. That's our JNA team, which is Justice and Accountability. That's our staff and consultants and our publishing partners, so the people we work with regularly. We often look for publishing partners and collaborations all the time, but that's who we kind of have direct control over day to day. We then have formal relationships with different groups. So in civil society and media, that's the Global Legal Action Network, who work with us on justice and accountability, organizations like GIJN, which help promote the work we're doing. We have researchers who are part of our GAP Discord community. So that's our volunteer community who work with us directly, that we train. It's only a small number of people, but those are people we engage with every single day. We also have tech fellows. These are people who volunteer to develop tools around the work that we're doing. And those two green layers are what we can plan around. That's what we have control over. But then you have the active relationships. And these are people that we aren't necessarily engaging with every day, but they're getting involved. So that can be media organizations that we might develop a partnership around a certain investigation. It's someone who could be part of one of our training exercises, who discovers something that we can start working on as an article. We have a public Discord with 30,000 members where we have people who can get involved and do investigations into whatever they want with the community. And we also have technologists, and these can be people who are hackathon participants, they're people who contribute to our GitHub account, and then you have the passive relationships. So this is kind of the broader community, really. These aren't the people who are always engaged with us, but they can still be involved in different ways. So what that looks like in practicality is, this is a really great example which came from our community. So back in February last year, there was an oil spill off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago. It was a complete mystery. No one knew where the oil had come from, and it was causing environmental damage. But it was Trinidad and Tobago, which meant most international media wasn't going to be interested in investigating it. But our Discord community were. So they started digging into what could have happened. They used tools that Bellingcat uses all the time, like marine traffic websites. We helped provide them with satellite information that we had access to. And this is just one part of the example of the conversation that they were having. So these are just volunteers discussing this and trying to figure out what was going on. So if we break this down, we can break this down to a three-step process: identify, verify, and amplify. So if you think of identify as gathering the evidence in the first place, seeing what's out there and bring it together in one place. Then we have this verification process. So that's where we actually review it, we try and investigate it, figure out what's true, what's not, understand timelines, where things took place. Now what's happening there is, in our active layer, our Discord community, that they're doing the identification. They are the ones who found the information in the first place, but then our colleague Logan came in and started working with the community to develop that further until we actually could turn it into the first article we published on this. And that was then amplified through our social media to our whole passive audience. But that didn't stop there. Once we did it once, we did it again. We went through that process again. We identified more information. People from that broader community came in towards the center of the onion and started engaging themselves. And we were able to publish another article with even more information. And we did that again. And eventually, we were able to publish enough information that identified this as part of Venezuelan oil smuggling operations, who owned the boats that were involved. The boats have now been seized. The United Nations Marine Insurance got involved because we had produced enough evidence about who was responsible so they could actually make a payout about this. And it had a really big impact on the understanding of what was happening and the international response to what happened, where if it hadn't been for the work of Bellingcat and, but more importantly, our volunteers, none of this would have happened. And again, we can do this with tool research as well. So one of our tech fellows identified an issue with a US corporate database. And it was really useful for research, but it was a nightmare to use. So he worked with one of our staff members to develop a piece of software that made it a lot easier to search it. And then we put that on our GitHub and put it out on social media so people could go back, develop the tool further they want it, use it themselves. And we actually have an online toolkit now that we've had it before, but we've got an AI search-powered version of it. So you can just say, I want to do this, and it'll tell you which tools to use. But we try and develop these tools kind of through the same process as well, engaging with different elements of the community. And it's this constant kind of, almost breathing in and out. We pull stuff out from the outside and bring it into the center, then we push it out again. You can repeat that process to a very, very powerful effect. So as we have here, we had a tech contributor come in and improve the piece of software with the original programmer and publish it on GitHub. So we're doing all this stuff, we're doing it online, but how do you actually scale this up? Because I think it's really, really important that as many people are doing this as possible. I think it's incredibly empowering, and what really inspired me in particular was this video. This is from a group called the Student View, and they were going into schools and teaching young people how to do investigative journalism work, and this is one of the videos they produced from a school in Bradford.
We got the news story from the students about the police chases. We thought it was a really good idea that they'd had, and we thought that it would be a really good story for the paper and the website. It's just the sort of thing that our readers are interested in, the sort of thing that affects people's daily lives in Bradford, and it's a really good thing for them to focus on.
Journalism is sort of a way to unravel a lot of mysteries in this world. The story was mainly about police chases in Bradford because they affect a lot of people, so that's where the idea came from.
Me and Ismail, we sat down on a computer and then we looked on the internet and we found out some information about it, and then we emailed the police to ask them questions. Before I wrote that article, I didn't know that that you could email the police and ask them information.
Freedom of information request in to the police, and that's the sort of thing that journalists would do all the time, but for the students to do that is very sort of brave almost. It's and it's great that they know that they can do that, and this information is public information.
Before the student view came in, I think I assumed that it would be about opinion-based articles. I didn't know much about the company, so I assumed that they might get students to think about issues in their community and then write an opinion piece. And I didn't realise that actually it would be much more factual and more like reporting than it was about them writing and making sure that students were well equipped before they wrote up a report, which is quite different to the skills they practice in English.
The student view, I really didn't expect it to be like this, and I just thought it was just going to be an organisation that they're going to come in and probably they're going to do about 75% of the work. Normally we're not given a voice. People think, oh, you're too young, and they just go over your opinion, don't really listen to you. The programme mainly changed my opinion on this quite a bit, because wherever we got mentioned, it had our name written right underneath it.
I think it's really important that students feel confident to express their opinion. I feel like any teacher will tell you that young people do have strong opinions, and it's a little bit of a stereotype that students don't care or spend a lot of time on social media, and I think that actually young people have got really strong opinions about the world around them, and perhaps the reason we don't always see that is because they don't have much of a platform. And I think that as a teacher or as an adult in this sector, that's part of your job, to give them the platform to talk about those issues.
So I watched that, got in contact with the Student View, and we spent a year training 200 teachers to deliver content around media literacy to support the work they're doing. This is about power, or rather it's about no power. It's about disempowerment. It's about young people feeling that they have no say in democracy in society. And we need to change that, because the way we consume information has changed dramatically over the last 15 years. We are no longer living in the Walter Lippmann's public opinion forming top-down gatekeeped information system. We're in a system where we are connected peer-to-peer. You are not recipients of information, you are participants in its creation and spread. So why don't we use that? Why don't we use that to empower you, to make society better, to make democracy service you, not to wait for you to get a job and become a politician and get some people to vote you in and then maybe vote on something every so often until everyone's fucking sick of it. Why can't we make you powerful now? Well, we can, so that's what we're going to do. So, start with universities. We've already worked with the University of Utrecht to develop open source material for their courses, and we've set up an investigation hub there. Their first investigation was into police violence that targeted students during pro-Palestinian protests. That was not what Bellingcat told them to do, that's what they wanted to do. So we then connect them with local institutions, NGOs, schools, local news organizations, and start looking at ways that we can start expanding that to different areas, to different subjects, to the stuff that they care about. And then we do that with more universities, and then we connect them together nationally. And then we do that internationally, and we connect them together internationally as well. And what we end up with is a network of people who aren't only just working on local issues, they're working on issues that are common to all of them. An issue that might be happening here in Leiden might be not that different from an issue that's happening, maybe in London, maybe in Caracas, who knows? But if we build these networks and we build these communities, then we create opportunities for this to happen. Opportunities for people to connect together, to be empowered, to actually have impact and change. And this isn't just a pipe dream. I've been doing that at Bellingcat for years. And believe me, if I can do that, any of you can do that. And that's what we want to train you all to do. So I'm hoping in the future we'll all see you getting involved. Thank you very much.
Let me see. I'll use the microphone. We now have 12 20 to 30 minutes for questions from the public, from the audience. It's your chance to ask a question to Eliot. You prefer to see? Yes, I'll just turn this on. That's on. Can I see some hands? If anybody would dare asking the first question. I see, let's see, can we start there? The gentleman.
Hi, Mr. Higgins. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering, when we were looking at the organizational structure of Bellingcat, in considering the work you do and some of the lies spread by certain proxies or state actors, I'm wondering whether they might have at some point tried to infiltrate or subvert your organization. How has that happened much or at all, and how do you try to prevent that?
In my experience, that doesn't really happen too much, and it's usually obvious if someone's trying to mess with us, because the thing with open source investigation, you're using publicly available information, and you're doing it in spaces where there's lots of people who can criticize that information if there's problems with it. So you get this kind of resilience built in automatically by the fact that, A, you can look at the original evidence. It's not if someone's opinion you're being given, it's a piece of evidence. And if there's something wrong with that, then you can identify that quite quickly. And it's very, very difficult to actually fake evidence in that context, because a digital object exists not by itself, but within a series of connections. You know, if a plane gets shot down in eastern Ukraine and videos start appearing, those videos are all connected. Those connections may not be obvious, they may be only connected in terms of time, but those connections there. So if you introduce something to that system that is foreign or false, then it doesn't have those connections. And that's something that I think is essential to understand, and that creates a resilience in that system.
Thank you.
Let's see, somewhere else in the audience. The lady over there. Yeah.
Good evening, an honor to meet you. I would like to ask you about the true believers, because I definitely agree with you on the fact that we can change the future of believing in disinformation, maybe improve the media literacy, educate young generation. But I was wondering about those believers who already deeply believe in something that was put in their minds through propaganda and disinformation, of course. Because, for example, a real-life example, I'm Ukrainian myself, and when the war started, I had many friends in Russia as well, and I wasn't against them or anything. But when we tried to show them the real situation or tell them what is going on, it was really hard to prove them, even though we were friends for more than 10 years. And my friend, he has a father in Russia, and when he texted him and explained what is going on in his city and sent him pictures, he said he denied all of that and said that his son is lying, and that's basically how they stopped talking. And he told his son, these are fake news, you're propaganded, watch TV, watch Russian news, and you will know the truth. And he replied really easily, Dad, I don't need to watch the news, I look through my window. And even that didn't help to persuade his father. So what, in your opinion, is possible to do, or is it even possible to change those true believers that already exist?
I would say it's probably close to impossible to do that, because the issue you have is that these people usually exist in an media ecosystem that is basically the walls of their lives. It's this information bubble that becomes the lens through which they see the entire world. So when you go to those people and say, no, you're wrong, they're just like, well, you've been fooled and deceived. I'm the one who's right, you're the one who's wrong. And you can present evidence to them, but in a sense, the better the evidence is, the more it convinces them that the conspiracy against them is vast and complicated, which just makes it even harder for them to be convinced that they're wrong. Because they have been drawn into a world of understanding that is completely false, but they believe to be 100% true. And that's really, really dangerous. Once people cross that threshold, it's very, very difficult to get them back. There's a really good book by Marianne Spring, the BBC journalist who works on their kind of disinformation beat, called Among the Trolls, where she goes and actually meets people like this. Time and time again, it's the same story told again and again, that you have people who lose trust in some source of authority, it's radicalized by some moment in their life or a series of moments in their lives, and they get to the point where they become increasingly isolated from their kind of friends, their community, because they found another community that tells them that what they believe is the truth, and that everyone else is either a fool or a liar. And once they've crossed that threshold, no amount of fact-checking websites, no brilliant articles by Bellingcat are ever going to change their mind. And that's why we have to lead with education. Because the approach since 2016 has been to fact-check our way out of this problem, and that does not work.
Okay. Much time for more questions, so we'll return on that side. Just behind you, Aidan. Just behind you. We'll come back to the front after, I promise.
Thank you for this inspiring lecture. You were talking about these information bubbles, but do you see any ways to break through these information bubbles these true believers are situated in?
The only time, or generally speaking, when people are broken out of those bubbles is because they go through another crisis and they have to seek the help of family members, or they come to a realization that they're miserable and they seek those help from family members. But in most cases, they find help from their community who just reinforce what they already believe. It's really, really difficult to break people out of these bubbles once they're inside them. And there's no consistent way of doing it because it's about personal beliefs and personal experiences. And you cannot kind of mandate from above how to address that. So again, that's why I believe education has to be where we begin with this, not, fact-checking our way out of it.
The gentleman here on the right, yeah. If I may, as we're waiting, a lot of these seems to me are psychological issues. So did Bellingcat do some digging into psychology research to try to understand what to do?
I personally have spent a lot of time on this and done a lot of reading on the topic. It's kind of, it brings in areas of sociology, philosophy, psychology, and it's a big, complicated issue. And I think when we've approached, and it kind of as the broader community, counter disinformation in the past, they've tried to reduce it down to one simple thing, that if only we can teach people not to believe Russia, everything's going to be okay. But that approach is frankly a joke and has had very little real-world impact, but it's made a lot of people very wealthy from milking governments from counter-disinformation efforts. And we need to stop doing that and actually take this much, much more seriously and have a whole society approach, not just a kind of finger-wagging approach.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Mr. Higgins. I just wanted to ask, because you dropped the pardon the term, choreodoctoros and shitification. I wanted to know if kind of the deterioration of the services that we all used to rely on in the OSINT community has impacted Bellingcat, and how you guys have gotten around that if it's caused a problem. Like, I too mourn the loss of the tweet deck, so.
Yeah, it's, I think there's partly been a shift in the way social media is used in terms of conflict. When I started out with Syria, it was Facebook, Twitter, really those were the two ones on YouTube. And now it's all Telegram. And really on these social media platforms now, if you go on Twitter, the kind of OSINT accounts that have all popped up are really just reposting stuff they found on Telegram. And one thing that I think is very important, and especially when we're talking about this education work, is not make it platform dependent. We're not going in to teach people how to be good at TikTok. We're teaching them the skills that they can apply in any space where they're active, where there's a community, rather than making it dependent on specific platforms. Now, in terms of sources and getting information, every conflict is different. A lot of it has really kind of crystallized around Telegram at the moment, but in 10 years' time, it could be a different set of platforms. So again, you've got to be dynamic. You've got to kind of understand where these communities are coming from. And again, that comes back to the idea that you've got to engage with communities who themselves are engaged with the investigation process to know where those spaces are. So it's constantly evolving, and we have to evolve along with it and not get set in our ways.
Thank you. We'll go there. The young lady waiting with her arm up for a few minutes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I completely agree that I think we need the young or our generation to believe more in democracy rather than to push until we're politicians and try to change things. I just, for example, in my personal case, I don't understand half of the things, technical things that go behind your work. So I don't feel entitled or capable to do as much as you're doing or your organization is doing. When I look at social media, I don't see everything that you're seeing. So is there any recommendation that you would have for people that are not as knowledgeable as you or your organization to push for, an improvement in this?
I would say, in my case, I had no idea what I was doing when I started doing this, and I had to figure out as I went along. There are a lot of resources available online now to teach yourself how to do it. Some of them are quite fun to do, like we have challenges at Bellingcat.com, and that allows, they're basically just fun games people can do, but it's based around geolocation and different techniques. So you can build skills doing that, reading guides and case studies. You can join, for example, our Discord community and observe just what people are doing. But I would recommend find a topic you're really, really interested in and just get really obsessed about it and find like-minded people. And again, our Discord is a good space for that as well. And just take a bit of time every day and just see what people are saying on those things, see what conversations are happening, and don't feel you have to do the entire investigation yourself. It might be there's a video that you think, well, I'll try geolocating that. And that, even if you fail, will help you develop that skill until it gets better and better and better. And geolocation is a kind of core competency, I would say, within this field. So that's a really good place to start. But one individual geolocation, like I showed with our Ukraine harm map, can be contributing to something that's much, much larger. So kind of our job at Bellingcat is to make sure you have the spaces, the tools, the case studies and guides that you need to learn from that, and create those spaces that you can come to and actually encounter other like-minded people and find allies and partners and start working with them yourself. But yeah, in this world at the moment, especially, things can feel very, very overwhelming. But pick one thing and stick with that, because if everyone does that, then everything should be covered.
Right in the middle there.
Hello, Mr. Higgins. It's an immense pleasure to meet you. So I want to ask about freedom of speech in this case, because obviously with all this misinformation stuff, there is a lot of people spreading it. Elon Musk, Jackson Hinkle, even here in Europe, we have Phidias right now in the European Parliament. And my question I want to ask is it possible to create a viable ecosystem of, Bellingcat-like sources of information that will be able to debunk all this disinformation and all of these fabricated, narratives, as opposed to more primitive practices like censorship? Is there a possibility of doing that?
I think that is possible, but we also need to make sure there's consequences for spreading false information, and that I'm not a fan of censorship online, even though I would sometimes love to see some people shut up. But what we really need to actually do is say, what are the consequences of someone lying? What are the political consequences? What are the social consequences? I mean, calling people out as liars all the time makes it a bit more difficult for them to operate in those spaces, but if there's a political consequence to that, so then you have to think, how do you actually create those political consequences? Because if it means voting for them every 4 years or so, then who cares? They can get away with it, and we're seeing exactly what happens in the US if, when that happens. And that means, for me, that the institutions that already exist, the processes that already exist, need to be engaged with. And I think this is often where this all falls apart, because we get angry on the internet or we investigate something, but then it's like, then what? So we have to start figuring out through these communities, through the networks that we're trying to develop, how we do that next stage. So it's not easy to do, but if you have a community who engage with that, you start creating opportunities for that to happen. And that's why building these networks, these communities, is something that I think is so important to actually push back against this kind of thing.
Okay, we go to the middle there. You. Yes.
Thank you so much for your guest lecture, like everybody has said so far. I have a question that kind of relates to the previous questions and also ones that have been asked before. If you look at more forms of social media that are operating more on the peripheries of social media, like 4chan, for example, or 8chan that was banned, or platforms like Truth Social, how do you envision Bellingcat kind of keeping up with these more covered-like social media platforms, and how can you kind of create a community in a sense, or connections to those different platforms?
Well, I would say those communities, in a sense, are self-selecting not to want those connections. And you're always going to have that. I mean, we'll never have a perfect internet where everyone's nice to each other and can figure out stuff together, what's true and what's not. There's always going to be people who don't trust the mainstream. They don't trust this or that. And there's always going to be a space for those people to go, and they're going to be horrible. So I think sometimes we worry a bit too much about those spaces and kind of figuring out how to connect to them. They're kind of lost already. Don't overthink that. Actually look the other way and say, what can we do in our own communities and spaces to make them better, more powerful, more engaged communities that have impact? What I think the risk is we end up with a situation where you have basically two groups of people on either side of an argument screaming at each other on the internet because they don't have any way to actually affect real change in power, and it gives them a false sense of empowerment. So if one side's screaming at you, maybe find something else rather than not screaming at them. Actually say, how do I have impact in the real world, rather than how do I upset people in an online space? And I think that is the kind of way forwards, rather than trying to engage with people who don't want to engage with you anyway, or if they do, they just want to troll you.
We're reaching close to the end of the time that we had planned, but we started a bit later, if it's okay with you. Should we do maybe 2-3 questions in a row, and then you just decide how you want to answer them?
To be honest,
you don't
if
like
you
that?
ask 2 or 3 questions in a row, I will forget the first 2 questions. So one at a time's okay.
A couple more questions then, and we'll go there first, and then we'll return somewhere on the right. I see you, Hans.
Yes, good evening. My question would be, with the rise of AI video and pictures and them becoming always better and better, less distinguishable, how do you feel, or how long do you feel you can keep up with the old school type of geolocalization? And how do you envision the future for that?
I don't think it causes a problem because, again, it exists in a network of information. And it's very hard to create multiple fake images of the same location to create that kind of false sense. And then you're also relying on so many different sources like satellite imagery, firms data if there's like a fire, that it's impossible to fake all of that. My concern is more that it will give people permission structures not to believe things that are true, rather than tricking people into believing stuff that isn't true. And that will just lead to all people either to have their opinions reinforced by stuff that's false, or it'll leave people to think, well, I don't know what's real anymore, so I'm just going to disengage. And both of those are very dangerous.
And one last question. We'll go there.
Thank you for your talk. I was wondering what your views are on governments increasingly trying to be transparent by just publishing raw data without any context. You see that a lot in the US now, especially after Elon Musk started to just randomly tweet out spending without context. What are your views on that, and how that leads to easily verifiable misinformation?
Well, that is the idea of malinformation. So it's true information that's being selectively shared to cause harm. And I think the weaponization of information held by the US government, by Elon Musk, is a fascist tactic that's being used to target and abuse people. I think what's happening in America at the moment is the death of American exceptionalism. I mean, it's disgusting what's happening over in the US at the moment, and I don't think it's going to stop. And I think we're going to see a huge abuse of power. I mean, I've just spent the last 48 hours seeing people celebrating how Bellingcat has lost all its USAID funding, and we've never been funded by USAID, yet there's a whole community of people are gleefully posting about it. But so, yeah, I just think it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and our only hope is in 2 years there'll still be elections in America and they'll all be voted out and defanged, but it's going to be a long 2 years.
Well, that was a depressing way to end the Q&A. Let's put a touch of a hopeful ending, perhaps, on the main thing that stays in my mind and that you mentioned before you started talking to when we were talking, is that emphasis on education, which of course is so important for us, and I think that resonates, of course, with us here at the university. And that's a slightly more positive note than all the negativeness around us. So can I please ask you to join me in a big round of applause to thank Eliot for a very good lecture. And thank you all for good questions. It was a big challenge.